Fill to capacity. Crazy good stories and timely topics. Podcast for people too stubborn to quit and too creative not to make a difference. Inspiring, irreverent, and informative. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Pat Benincasa, and welcome to Fill to Capacity. Today's episode, Defining Moments, Deadlines, Truth, and Stories to Tell. My guest is Damon Maloney, award-winning journalist, reporter, and news anchor. And I'd like to give a brief bio. Damon went to Hill Murray School in Maplewood, Minnesota, and that's where I met him when I was artist in residence. So I have to do the shout out for Hill Murray. He got his degree in broadcast journalism at Columbia College in Chicago. As for his career, I just want to say that from his very first job, Damon has received several awards for his work. He was a reporter in Fort Smith, Arkansas, where he won Associated Press Award, first place for Spot News, second place for Investigation. He was weekend anchor and producer in Youngstown, Ohio, where he received the Lynn Media Circle of Excellence Award. But when he joined WJRT TV in Flint, Michigan, as lead reporter on the Flint Water Crisis, he received the regional Edward R. Murrow Award and the Michigan Emmy. He was the weekday morning anchor at WOIO TV in Cleveland. He received a 2019 Emmy for live reporting, and again in 2020. Well, welcome, Damon Maloney. It is wonderful to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me, and that was quite the introduction. Yeah, quite the career stretching a couple of different states, and it all started at a young age, and then things just got into motion, and thanks to the help of a lot of people, have been able to accomplish a lot and still have fire in the belly for this. Pat, I do want to say that regional Edward R. Murrow Award and Emmy Award, it was a group effort
Okay.
on behalf of all the employees that worked on the water crisis coverage in Flint, Michigan.
Damon, thank you for clarifying that it was a team award. You said something, and I'm going to quote you here. We all have defining moments. One of mine happened during elementary school, which launched me down the path to becoming a journalist. Will you tell us about that day? What happened?
Yeah, so this was back in sixth grade. I was attending school at Bailey Elementary in Woodbury, Minnesota. And you have friends and you're constantly playing and clowning around. So I had a group of friends and we were bored. So we came up with this idea of, hey, let's start a TV show. So we got the camcorder for one of my friend's family members, and we just started recording stuff. And this was just kind of just fun stuff around the house on weekends. But then we took it to our school librarians and we said, we want to do a TV show about school news. And we incorporated a couple of things that were going on at the elementary school. We were in the midst of a big fundraiser. I believe it was for the local food pantry. And there were other things going on. And the librarian said, hey, we're here to support you. Let's do this project. So, Pat, that started us on this journey of creating this television show featuring elementary school news. And we called it Kids Chat.
Nice.
And in the process of doing this, I reached out to WCCO. That was the station my family always watched. And Dave Huddleston was the morning anchor. Heather Tesh was the meteorologist. And we said, hey, Dave, can we come down and see how you guys do it as the pros? We're doing this school news program, and we want to see how you guys do it. So they took us up on our request, and we went down to CCO down there, downtown Minneapolis, Nicollet Mall, and we toured the station. We watched the newscast. They talked to us afterward. And we got to go around the different areas of the newsroom and the station and really see how they put on
Hmm.
television news. So that sparked an interest. Fast forward to when our program, Kids Chat, was finished. We sent an invite to Dave and Heather to come to the school for a viewing and to have lunch, and they accepted. So they came, and we had that interaction. And from that moment on, I was sold. I want to be a journalist. I want to be a reporter.
I guess you you started something, and it's really important to highlight that when elementary school kids find a passion, but you kids took it to the next level by inviting them to come, and you went to see them. What do you guys do? Because this is the real thing. So I applaud the fact that somehow you were encoded with this mission to be a journalist.
Yeah, and I think back, I don't even know where it came from. It was just, I guess, an idea.
Yeah.
Let's try it. Let's see what happens. And they were so gracious with their time, their
Yeah.
energy, their expertise, and it just really it stuck with me. And to this day, I still talk to Dave Huddleston. And actually, just recently, I kind of had an interaction through LinkedIn with Heather Tesh, and I sent them a photo that we took that day, and
Uh,
there was a newspaper article that was written, and I tell everybody this is how my dream started.
oh, I bet they appreciate that too. Well, in your career, you've covered a lot of different stories. Is there one story that really moved you? Or I'm sure you have many, but is there one that really kind of got under your skin?
Yeah, I would say there's several, but I think the most profound is my time covering the Flint Water
Oh,
Crisis. 2014 to 16 is when I was there as a reporter and weekend anchor. And that story broke not long after I started there. The city had just returned to using the Flint River as the
yes.
water source. And there was so much history with that, with the automotive industry being big in the city,
Hmm.
and we all know things that happen over time. But there was reassurances made to residents that this is safe, going to be best for the city in terms of quality, in terms of finances, and whatnot. And it turned out to not be the case. So not long after I started there, residents started complaining about the smell, the taste,
Hmm.
the odor of the water, and they were taking it to city council meetings and any meetings that they can get their hands on, and they were sharing their stories about rashes and hair
Yeah.
falling out. And reporters like myself and others in the market, we did our due diligence, getting their side of the story, taking their concerns to city leaders and
Yep.
decision makers, and we got reassurances from city leaders that there's constant testing going on and that everything falls within limits. So it took more work, I would say, on behalf of journalists, but also the people of Flint. They were determined to get somebody in to listen to them, somebody with credence, and they reached out to Mark Edwards at Virginia Tech, and he was able to come to Flint and do random sampling across the city with a team of people from the university, and they found the problem, and that really launched into the Flint Water Crisis. So covering that story and seeing how lives were impacted because of decisions made by so-called leaders, it was really eye-opening, and it was tragic meeting parents who were talking about their children who were impacted by elevated lead levels. There was a family, Leanne Walters. She was one of the early activists, an environmental activist now who does a lot of work on water issues and others. She had twin boys, and the lead had impacted them differently. Both had documented lead
Mm.
poisoning, and one of the boys was having more problems in school with paying attention, learning issues, and physically he looked different than his twin. They always were kind of the same,
Yeah.
height, weight, and he was, stunted growth, and he had, physical effects. Yeah, so the twins, it was really just eye opening to see how the twins who had grown up being, together all those times in terms of height and weight, pretty much looking the same. They were twins. How the lead affected one, more than the other.
Yep.
His growth was stunted. He was having more problems at school, and the way of seeing the impact of this lead crisis. So that was really, I think, one of the most profound moments of my career, and really just showed the importance of working in the community, listening, digging for answers and facts, and holding people accountable.
I have to say, Damon, I saw an interview where you asked the mayor of Flint, were mistakes made? And I thought, wow, that's pretty direct. And so you're talking about a story, you're new in that area, and all hell breaks loose with a story with so many potential hornet's nests. And there you are. And in the midst of this, did you have any idea that the power of journalism to start digging and really opening up what was going on, revealing what was going on? I mean, you were pretty new to journalism at that point, were you not?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. That was my third job in, but I will tell you, Pat, I never had been assigned a story, I would say, of that level, that
Yeah.
gravity. You speak of, what was happening to people, health wise, you have politics involved there,
Oh,
you have
yeah.
science. I mean, high level stuff that we had to kind of understand enough to break down into common terms for everyday people. We were doing FOIA requests, Freedom of Information requests, trying to follow the paper trail of
Yeah.
decisions and who knew what when and who acted upon information that was coming to them. So there were so many complexities, and yeah, I would still say I was a relatively young reporter. But the good part of this is that you had the fundamental training and past experiences,
Yep.
and you had a team that was there to support you and kind of guide you along the way and work in tandem. So it really was a team effort, but as you mentioned, you really realize the importance of journalism and being able to get answers, hold people accountable, and hopefully that work results in action. And the nice thing about that story was seeing some of the work to fix wrongs as much as possible, and I got to see the start of infrastructure changes, new pipes going in from the street to the homes, the service lines, and seeing some of the health and wellness investments start to trickle in, to help kind of mitigate some of the damage done to particularly young children.
Well, that leads me to another direction, and that is there was something called the Fairness Doctrine. And the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, at that time required licensed radio and TV broadcasters to present fair and balanced coverage of controversial issues. And it granted equal airtime to opposing candidates for public office. In 1987, the FCC repealed the Fairness Doctrine, but it kept the editorial and personal attack provisions until 2000. And what that was, those personal attack provisions said that the TV stations had to give time for an individual or a group attacked on TV that focused on a controversial issue. They had to have equal time. They had to have time to come back. But then those provisions were taken away in 2011. So, Damon, I want to ask you, do we need a fairness doctrine in 2023?
Wow, that's a really big question. I think I've always learned that you have to deal with facts and you have to be, fair and balanced. There's always three sides to a story. They say, the truth, the lie, and something kind of in the middle of what actually happened. But I think, it is up to each institution, I think, to have standards in place that practice good, responsible journalism. And I think, any reputable place, would have those in place and strive every day to make them better. I don't know the full history of, why and, things were repealed,
Hmm.
and what all set that into motion. But I think it has to be on the forefront of every, credible journalist's mind, dealing with facts, fairness and balance, and really delivering for your audience, your people with credible reporting.
So, what is the hardest part about being a reporter? What would you say?
I think the hardest part nowadays is the emergence and just how crazy social media is. Information is coming out so fast that sometimes it is hard to decipher, even for the best of the best, what may be true, what may be false, what needs more investigation. And, you're constantly in this battle over time and pumping out content and upholding, the standards of journalism. For instance, when events happen, a lot of times, sometimes you deal with public officials or official agencies like police departments, and they will put out a press release, or you go down to the department and talk to somebody face to face, a public information officer. Well, nowadays, they're just skipping all of that and they're putting the information directly online. And in many ways, that's good because it gets out faster. It gets out to, the public, their constituents. But sometimes it's a challenge for us too, because you're missing that line of communication. You like to think somebody's always monitoring those social media accounts, for things that are coming out, but we just don't have the manpower to be doing that 24/7. In many ways, information is a lot more accessible, but it's also harder to get and to monitor. And then you have the whole what's real, what's fake
Yep.
dilemma that's going on. And you really just have to do your homework, slow down, and know that in the end, you have to be credible and you can't put that on the line and to rush something out before
Yep.
you have all the facts.
We live in a time where we've had a sea change in reporting and cable networks, TV networks. For example, the politicizing of science, the politicizing of education, the politicizing of anything that happens immediately breaks down into political camps. And there's this thing about, I think they call it truthiness versus truth. And the idea of facts, like people are now going to Google, they want to know information, they feel like they're armed with everything they need to know. We don't know if those sites are reputable, but they feel as though they know everything they need to know. So it seems like it's a very challenging time to try to be a voice of reason, of fact, without without all this political fallout. Would you agree with
Yeah, as you
that?
mentioned, everything is political, it seems like. Maybe the simplest mundane thing is a political fight of, beliefs. And we hear it constantly, in our inboxes, on our viewer vent lines. I'll mention this little story during, the height of COVID-19, and when vaccination information was coming out and the government was talking about vaccinations
Yep.
and the importance of that. There was lots of hearings and different meetings taking place at the local level. And here in Ohio, there was a nurse who testified in front of Ohio House hearing, and she basically was pushing a debunked theory talking about, getting the vaccine makes people magnetic.
Yes.
And she was in the House hearing, and she held up, I believe it was a key and a bobby pin to her body, and saying that, this was true. And obviously, this was a debunked theory. She looked very foolish. But that's just an example of an issue becoming political. And as you mentioned, it's happening in other areas too:
Yep.
education, science, just about everything. So it's really important for journalists, again, to get those facts, get the facts, try and corroborate with other sources. And when you're giving information that may be political or cause controversy, that
Yep.
you source and cite, where you are getting your information from. And I think that's one of the things we've seen a lot of change in too is, real time fact checking and reporting and trying to cite sources of information so that viewers know that not our personal opinion, that we're not making it up, and that this is where the information came from and that we have vetted it to the best of our ability.
That goes into the next area. In March of 2022, the Pew Research Center did a survey of 12,000 U.S. journalists. They identified several specific areas of concern for journalists, including the future of press freedom, widespread misinformation, and political polarization, which you've really identified, and the impact of social media. So now it seems like a reporter isn't just reporting. A good reporter is going to have to learn how to navigate all of these different concerns. And oh, by the way, deliver factual news.
And do it on a deadline.
Oh, yeah, let's not forget that.
That is ever increasing. Yeah, there are so many challenges. It goes well beyond the who, what, where, when, why, dealing with so many different factors as you're trying to put together your article, your podcast, your newscast. And sometimes it's daunting, but these are real challenges that, all journalists face. And some of the scrutiny is warranted, as we work to tell stories and document history. And it's a challenge, especially too, for younger journalists who are getting in the business, because sometimes educational institutions aren't preparing them as best they can for what they're going to encounter, so-called real world as a working journalist. But you have to kind of just do your best to navigate all these and rely on your team and resources that are available to you. There's many great journalism organizations that try and guide journalists through different topics and complexities that come up. National Association of Black Journalists has put out a reporting guide to deal with, what we all witnessed on the police body cam video out of Memphis, Tennessee. The Society of Professional Journalists and many other organizations try and help journalists as they carry out this important work.
Yes. Looking at your extensive background in broadcast journalism, you've been a reporter, a news anchor, a producer. And of all these different aspects of broadcast journalism, is there one area that you really love?
Oh, that's a really good question. I thoroughly enjoy just getting out and meeting people, kind of meeting them in their environment, figuring out what their story is, and sharing that with others. You encounter so much tragedy.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, you also meet so many inspiring people. We were just at the grocery store a few days ago, and a woman came up to us. I was there shopping with my wife and my son, and she said, "Hey, you probably don't remember me, but you came to my house a few years ago and interviewed my husband and I." And she kind of explained a little bit of who she was. And I said, "Oh, I remember." I said, "That's when I first started here in Cleveland. And I totally remember the story. Her husband had suffered a widowmaker heart attack. She was the one who delivered CPR, saved his life. They had the dispatcher audio that they gave us. And the dispatcher was going to receive an award. And, her husband lived. And she really came through when it mattered most. But this was several years ago that we had met. But she remembered me. She stopped me. She said hi, which I was really happy because some people don't stop and connect the dots and whatnot. They don't want to bother you. But it's a people business. I always tell people journalism is a people business.
Mm-hmm.
People have to like you, they have to trust you, and they come to you many times when they're out of luck and they can't find answers or they can't get a breakthrough. So I just really enjoy getting out into the field and meeting people and figuring out the best way to tell their story. And then I would say too, just behind the scenes, building newscast. That's a team sport. You're dealing with your writers, your producers, your co-anchors, your field crews, and you're really trying to find a way to best showcase pictures and audio and really put on a good product for viewers that's insightful, that's meaningful, and also a little entertaining. I always tell people too, it's entertainment too, to a degree. So I like those aspects, but at the end of the day, it's a people business and you have to be able to interact with lots of diverse types of people, both in the field and in the office.
You mentioned throughout this podcast the word team. It's very clear that you see yourself in tandem with other people. And sometimes people get the impression that a news anchor is solo or isolated from the news or the gathering or what's
Mhm,
really happening. But
mhm,
you seem to bring it back to, we work as a team, that you rely on each other, and that there's a unity, a focus. Get the story out. It's the people that count.
mhm. Yeah, I think there's been, waves of what an anchor is, and right now we're really in a time where anchors they just can't sit on the desk and read teleprompters. They have to be out in the field. They have to be kind of on the front lines,
Okay.
working in the community. That just builds credibility.
Yeah.
You're the face of this product. Oftentimes you're the one introducing the reporter pieces, and people like to know that you have a connection to them, that you have a connection to the place you're living, the community. And there's no better way to do that than to get out in the field, hit the pavement,
Yep.
and do the work. And you can't do this alone. If you try and do it alone, I won't say you'll fail because you won't fail, but everything I think is just better when you have more people involved in the final product. You have different backgrounds, different perspectives that all kind of build into what people see. And it's a lot of work. There's lots of moving parts. And in television news, you're always trying to be up to date. There's lots of
Yeah.
breaking news,
Yeah.
and you always want to be kind of the first to get that information out responsibly. But it takes a team. You have to trust your team too. We talked a lot about that too in various workplaces that I've been. Being able to trust your teammates, to know that they kind of have the same fundamentals and the same operating procedures so that you limit the amount of errors that can happen. And from time to time, there are errors, just like with any industry, but any good organization looks at that afterwards, tries to figure out what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening in the future. But transparency is always the best policy.
Yep.
And you're seeing a lot more of that in my industry, broadcast news.
I'd like to go in a different direction. Edward R. Murrow was a highly respected American broadcast journalist. As I was growing up, he was the gold standard. And for those who might not know, he first gained prominence during World War II with a series of live radio broadcasts from Europe for CBS. And Edward R. Murrow said, quote, "To be persuasive, we must be believable. To be believable, we must be credible. Credible, we must be truthful."
Mm,
End quote. There are people who need to find the truth, to dig deep, to find why something happened or to put the missing pieces together because truth matters. What
mhm.
drives them? What drives you, Damon? Why is truth important?
I've always just grown up in a household where the truth was expected out of us from every little thing. Just growing up in a household where your words mattered
Mhm.
and you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. And accountability. I had I wouldn't say overly strict parents, but they had expectations and they wanted to make sure that we lived up to those expectations. And a lot of that just fell upon being a good person, trying to help others, and falling into all that category is telling the truth, no matter how hard it is, no matter what you think the consequences are going to be. And as a kid, obviously, you fail at that, more so than you would want.
Yeah.
But you learn and you grow. But those are the fundamentals that I've taken throughout my life thus far. And as I have a son that's going to be about 3, those are conversations we have, kind of, age appropriate conversation about telling the truth and, just living up to your word.
And when you talk about working in the public and trying to get people to tell you things, they have to feel that they can trust you.
Hmm.
What do
Hmm.
you do, Damon, when you are in, especially like the Flint situation, where I'm sure a lot of people were trying to hide a lot of things, but all sorts of different situations
Yeah.
where someone might be a little reticent to talk to you? What do you do to reassure them?
I always just try and kind of meet them where they are, introduce myself, tell them, why I'm there and kind of what the goal is. And, we talk about in layman's terms, we want the truth to get out there. We want to know maybe what happened to you. We want to know what was done to you, what you would like to see happen to fix a problem, or tell us about, who this person was who maybe you've lost because you probably know them better than anyone else. So I think it's always just trying to explain why we would like to talk to them and what the goal is. And sometimes, the goals are different for each story. As far as sometimes we do like stories where we're trying to get a direct result, we're trying to get somebody's problem fixed. Sometimes we're trying to find justice for a family
Mm,
who maybe have fallen victim to a crime. So I think just always being honest with them and meeting them where they are. You kind of have to read the room a lot of times when you're interviewing people, know how to ask the right questions, when to listen more, when to ask those follow-up questions. And then I kind of just always talk about myself a little bit in the realm of where I've come from, different
mhm.
places I've worked, so they kind of get an understanding of who you are. And sometimes they have questions about the process, and you talk about that. But a lot of times it's just about how you approach people, and they kind of get a sense of who you are. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And you have to
Yeah.
respect people when they don't want to talk to you, kind of explain, why you're trying to talk to them. And sometimes you push a little bit more and sometimes you don't. But at the end of the day, you have to be respectful and you have to act professional and carry on. I've had many doors slammed in my face, no comments, and some very interesting situations. But you always have to conduct yourself as a professional. Now that doesn't mean that you're not aggressive or competitive, or you ask those tough follow up questions, but you do so with dignity, with
Yeah.
professionalism, and respect.
When you're talking, Damon, I'm struck by the value of your intuition. It sounds like you are highly intuitive. When you say reading a room means you read the energy in the room, the looks, the glances, everything, what someone's wearing, their body language, everything, everything. Sort of like being a teacher. When you walk in the classroom, you got to check
Yeah.
out what's going on and read it energetically in other ways. Have you always been intuitive? And as a reporter, did you have to grow into trusting that? Or was that something you've always had?
No, I think I had to grow into it. My workflow has changed a lot from my first job to where I am now. You kind of go in with set questions you want to ask, and
Hmm.
you have them written down, and you're making sure you ask the question exactly how you wrote it down. And in that process, in many ways, you can't help it. You're the rookie, but you're missing so much of that information that may
Yeah.
be coming to you by way of what they're saying, and you might miss that nugget of information that's key to your story, or a moment for a follow-up question that could
Hmm.
turn the story in a different direction. So now days when I go into a story to an interview, I obviously have some background information, some key questions that I know I need answers to, but I'm less rigid about,
Hmm.
I have to ask this question because I'm really having a conversation and listening. So I think you just learn that through time, experience, being exposed to other people's work and examples. But I would say I've always kind of just been curious, asked a lot of questions. Well, why
Hmm.
is it like that? And does it have to be that way? And who's responsible? I think some of that is just, from my upbringing
Hmm.
and kind of just naturally having that. And then you kind of fine tune it as you go through life.
Well, that brings me to my final question. What advice would you give someone wanting to become a broadcast journalist in this cable network, social media world? What would you say to them? Because it's a different world than when you started.
I would say expose yourself to people who are doing what you think you want to do so that you get an introduction to what it truly is. Try and get involved in community programs, community workshops like I did in high school and middle school. See if you can do job shadowing experiences, internships, so that you get as much information about this as possible before it's time to really kind of make a decision. I think also figure out if you want to be a journalist or an influencer.
Whoa.
because they're two different things. They are
Say more.
two different things. A lot of times you see people blurring the lines, and I think social media is a way that's kind of precipitated some of that. But they're two different things. Do you just want to be on TV for your sake, or do you want to be on TV and actually help people and do the important work that matters? Is it about you or is it about them? So those are some of the big things I would say, because I would just say there's a lot of people who are blurring the lines,
Hmm.
and it dilutes the product. It dilutes the work, the important work that should be happening.
Boy, that's a really incredible point that you just brought out. Journalist versus influencer. Those are two very different things. But as you say, that line is getting blurred.
Yeah, and I guess too, I don't want to paint everybody in the same picture about influencer, but a lot of what I'm speaking of is people who are just self-serving, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
The spotlight's on me versus how can I be of service to you? Because journalism is a service business, I believe. It's a people business and it's a service business. So,
So maybe the truth of the matter is, for anybody going into journalism, studying it in college, the first question you need to ask yourself, are you doing it for me? What I want? Do I want the spotlight? Or am I doing it because I feel this need to tell a story that will help people to make decisions or touch their lives?
yeah, understand a problem, a person, a situation much better. And, yeah, yeah.
Wow. Well, Damon Maloney, it has been wonderful having you on FTC today and talking about your amazing career and journalism. Thank you so much for your passion. It's wonderful.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for including me in your podcast. You're doing amazing work. You always have, and I'm happy to share some time with you.
Well, thank you. And thank you, listeners. If you enjoyed the FTC podcast, please subscribe. And thank you, Natalie Zett, sound engineer. Thank you. Bye.